So yes, today I'd like to speak about the acquisition of medical knowledge amongst herders and veterinarians in Mongolia. Part 1, a vet family and ties to a herding community. In accordance with Russian initiatives during the Soviet era, from 1921 until 1991, each Sum, or administrative district in Mongolia, was set up with a central hub, which provided essential infrastructure such as a boarding school, hospital, post office, theatre, and a veterinary clinic. And this is a picture of the boarding school. After Mongolia became a democracy, veterinary services were gradually privatised, which meant that vets employed in every Sum across the country were largely left without incomes. Herders were not able to afford to pay for veterinary services, which resulted in vets engaging largely in a system of barter and exchange of herd animals, meat, or dairy products in order to survive within the veterinary profession. Some of my initial impressions in the field in the Mongolian countryside in early 2005 were through a veterinary extended kinship network. I had connected with academics at the State Agricultural University in Ulaanbaatar. A young veterinary lecturer, Altansukh, said he would assist in connecting me with a herding community in his homeland, or Nutag, and would locate an appropriate herding family for me to reside with. His father, Serendorj, was the local veterinarian and lived in the Sum. So that's actually the Sum there. As a part of his veterinary responsibilities, Serendorj would visit encampments every month or so by motorbike during the winter months, or on horseback during the warmer months, or on horseback during the long winter months, as a horse is better able to negotiate mud, snow and ice. After arriving at the Sum late the night before, we spent the following day visiting herding families in the district by Russian Jeep. And as you can see, the Russian Jeep was struggling and we had to pull it up this mountainside. At each herding encampment, the family would receive news of the day, or it's just called news, which would inevitably turn to the health of the herds, while the male head of the household would ply us with shots of vodka. Serendorj examined 1 or 2 sick individual animals, gave advice on what the problem was and how they could take measures to treat it. By the end of the day, the vet was stumbling over his words and his steps, but he was in great spirits. And that's what it looks like inside a ger, when often full of people. So on his routine rounds, he would advise what to do if any animal happened to be weak or injured, but few herders could afford to pay for penicillin or other antibiotics to treat infections. This meant, however, that long-held oral traditions and applied knowledge, including the extensive use of medicinal plants and bloodletting techniques, have been retained in the treatment of herd animals in Mongolia. Some vets also used these nomadic means of treatment, advising herders on the best options in addition to the use of biomedicine. The vet lecturer Agi informed me that many vets still perceive bloodletting as an effective means against particular ailments, such as if a horse was lame after horse racing. At this field location, I ended up residing with a herding family who are relatives of the local vet family. Within the herding encampment, or hot el, almost daily a family treats the herd animals for some ailment or another. Each morning the herd animals are observed for signs of illness or weakness. And here in that photo they're sorting out the young ones from the adults. And so they'd often treat, this sheep was feeling weak in the spring, and so they were using an egg as protein. And in autumn, herding families collect medicinal herbs, often after the 20th of August, coinciding with haymaking when the grass is at its longest. Each plant species is collected at a specific time, whether it is the fruit, the stalk, root, leaf or flower, and then dried and stored in cloth bags, reused from old clothing. Other medicinal products are also collected from the surrounding environment, dried and stored, such as tree mushrooms, lichen, minerals, and wild animal organs. In 2005, I rode on horseback with the matriarch of the herding family to the Sum Centre. We stopped off to visit the vet's wife, who had also trained as a vet and would assist her husband, the two having originally met in vet school. Like the local doctor or teachers, the vet family was what made the local township still function, but all were struggling without decent government salaries. Most supplemented their income with other means, usually through family members nurturing herd animals. A pastoral livelihood, then, is still the lifeblood of rural communities and is how people survive beyond the bustling Mongolian capital. With little government salary as a university lecturer, the vet family's eldest son, Alton Sok, went into the more profitable timber and building industry. And so often herders use motorbikes to travel between their encampments and the local Sum. So the vet's daughter, Amara, started veterinary school in 2006, and by the time I returned to the field in 2007, she arrived at the herding encampment with her father, riding pinion on the back of the motorbike. She was learning from his applied knowledge by assisting him with vaccinations and worming treatments. I was sad to hear in 2009 that her father had passed away. Amara subsequently took over the family practice and became the district veterinarian. So in this photo, you can see the kind of track that they drive on. It's just basically a dirt sort of driveway. In the late summer of 2017, she was driving her car around the different herding encampments, vaccinating the lambs, kids and calves against brucellosis. The government mainly invests in the prevention of virulent zoonotic diseases that can cross between species to infect humans. Specific vaccines are administered based on the perceived threat and past occurrence of a zoonotic disease within each district. Amara mentioned the limited distribution of vaccinations and the need for herders to rely on the herd's immunity through good pasture. My herding friend, and that's a photo of her, who is the vet's cousin, retorted, "Herders bring in animals from a disease source in another area, which is free from it. What will we do then? We need to look after our herds. We have no defence against such virulent diseases." She was responding to Amara in a heated way because there weren't vaccinations that covered all animals against diseases such as foot and mouth, as the trading of breeding animals from other districts could bring in such highly contagious diseases. As an intermediary between the herding community and state policies, the local veterinarian bears much of the brunt of herders' frustrations when the distribution of vaccines have such an impact on herders' livelihoods. There are also strict government policies with regard to vaccination programs where if the veterinarian doesn't vaccinate by a specific date, then they may be fined. Veterinarians have a large administrative area to cover. For instance, one veterinary couple from Eastern Mongolia indicated that they were responsible for over 60,000 animals in their district. Veterinarians have a degree of prestige as educated professionals within the community, but are also often admonished by herders for their ineffectiveness, which is largely due to a lack of government and financial support. Another vet indicated that he was only provided with enough vaccines to immunise a third of the animals in the district, which meant that he had to make some tough decisions about which herding encampments to prioritise for vaccination. It would also mean that the vaccine program becomes largely ineffectual, given that 2/3 of the animals in the district would remain without immunity from disease. So after having pulled that Jeep up to the top of the pass, this is a photo of us celebrating, and you can see Terendorj, the local vet, on the right. Through my initial connections with the local veterinarian and his extended kinship networks, it influenced my own connections with local herding families whom I still return to. The vet family are an example of the kinds of pluralistic knowledge frameworks that exist in Mongolia, whereby both parents and subsequently their children studied at the State Agricultural University to become veterinarians. Medical knowledge is obtained through a formal institutional system, but is also influenced by the extended kinship networks. This meant father and then daughter learnt medically related skills through not only written, but oral and applied knowledge in the treatment of illness through intergenerational nomadic pastoral knowledge practices. Mongolian veterinarians have to negotiate the conflicted role of administering vaccinations as part of government policy, which makes up a large proportion of their small income each year, while also having just as pressing obligations in relation to family members within the surrounding herding community, whom they are reliant on for social standing and as an ongoing means of survival in the countryside. And now I'll go to a second example, this is part 2, practicing traditional knowledge Mongolian medicine in conjunction with science. In the spring of 2017, I visited a famous monastery, which has been in existence since 1727. The monastery lies at the foot of a mountain with an extensive view out over a broad river valley. I managed to get an audience with the head monk and asked him if there were any maramba or specialist Buddhist medical doctors. He recommended a local medicine expert instead and passed on his mobile phone number. The medicine man indicated that he was not too far away and he was just in search of a lost cow. So we managed to track him down, a diminutive figure in the expansive landscape, dressed in traditional clothing while still holding the mobile phone in one hand and a newspaper in another. So it's a plastic bag, but the newspaper's within it. We stood conversing for a time before he indicated that he was willing for us to interview him with the monastery still in the background. Although particularly knowledgeable about different medicinal plants and their uses, he is also interested in science and innovative ways of solving problems. This is evident in other adaptable herders, but was particularly noticeable in Shagdar's conversations. He did not hold a sense of nostalgia, or does not hold a sense of nostalgia for traditional ways, but when questioned, could see the advantages of new technologies such as motorbikes, mobile phones, new breeding techniques, and the vaccination of livestock. I think because it has been tough surviving in the countryside during his lifetime, his view is that new technologies may make daily life easier in the future. Shagdar has had a long association with the monastery, with a cabin or bashin nearby. He acts as caretaker during the colder months of the year when the monastery is less inhabited. One way knowledge on medicinal plants was passed on in Mongolia was through learning within monasteries as educational institutions where monks could train as specialists in healing rituals and medicinal treatments. Shagdar, however, did not learn about medicinal plants from venerable monks in ancient sutra, but from elders in the herding community, and supplemented this with information from taxonomic books written in Mongolian. He observed that 20 of the rare medicinal plants he could identify were not noted in such books. In the summer of 2019, he spent a month or two collecting numerous medicinal plants while he was out herding. He gathered 270 plant species and dried them within sheets of newspaper, carefully labeling them with a scientific name and local common name. As he leafed through the pages, he knew all of their names by heart, and additionally explained the medicinal uses for both humans and other animals. He noted some species were becoming rare in his homeland, while others were still relatively common. I asked how he applied medicinal plants to the herd animals, and he replied, "I prepare the herbs for bloat, if they are poisoned by vegetation they've eaten, and for cuts and wounds. Generally, I use herbs for stomach upsets. We can't afford to spend modern medicine on herd animals day in, day out. Some injections have toxic side effects. As much as possible, we need to keep the animals healthy. So I collect, prepare, and administer herbal medicines and limit the use of modern medicine. It retains our nomadic steppe culture. When the illness is chronic or contagious, then there's not much choice other than to use antibiotics." How am I going for time? I met his nephew, Bart Eredue, a young vet who lives in the local Sum, as does Shagdar seasonally. Bata's father was also a vet in the district. Once Bata could ride a horse at the age of 4, he would follow his father on horseback as he made his rounds across the district. In 2011, he went to veterinary school and began studying. In relation to Shagdar's breadth of knowledge, he states, "One of the wonders of nomadic culture is that we are taught from birth. We learn while herding animals and update our knowledge about the uses of different plants. Elders used to teach plants to kids, whether they were relatives or not. Although Bata has learnt some of his uncle's medicinal knowledge, he does not use these methods as part of veterinary practice. Bata's job largely involves the distribution of vaccines from A-grade zoonotic disease or treatment through antibiotics. According to Bata, herders do not seek out a vet when the symptoms first present and the illness is mild. When the disease becomes dangerous, then they see a veterinarian. Vets then have no choice but to resort to antibiotic treatment for the herd animal. Traditional treatment is a method of prevention based on careful observations of symptoms in individual animals, including improving a herd's immunity." He pointed out that through growing up in the countryside, although he studied science and biomedicine at veterinary school, and I quote, "I've also known herd animals since I was a child and have a different perspective from a person who has graduated from an urban high school and then studied to be a vet. I know exactly what to do." And so that was an interview with him in autumn of 2019. So, as a young professional in the community with scientific backing, he was confident in speaking his opinion while being interviewed, but I could detect that Shagdar was torn about how much to confide. He admitted when not being recorded that he had been bundled off to the police station during the Soviet era to be interrogated about using traditional medicine to treat people who were sick in the community. This episode made him wary, and he was also clearly influenced by the anti-religious discourse during a formative time in his life, which meant that he was reticent about promoting techniques that were not acceptable according to science. When asked why he wasn't allowed to treat humans during socialist times, he responded, and I quote, "It was forbidden to treat people with medicinal plants. Science-based medicine was to be used. Treatment with medicinal plants and bloodletting were viewed as being part of feudal society." So although times have changed, he would not speak about whether he treated humans, but openly talked about his treatment with animals, with herd animals. So in conclusion, like many herders, Shagdar takes a pluralistic approach to health and healing, readily adopting scientific measures he reads in books or making use of biomedicine if he can afford it. He draws upon the oral knowledge that is being passed down to him by elders within the herding community. With regard to infectious zoonotic diseases, herders accept that vaccination is an important means of preventing fast-spreading virulent disease, such as influenza. District vets such as Amra and Bata recognise that Mongolian medicine is milder with fewer side effects, often preferred by herders as a preventative measure or to counter digestive and respiratory issues. They may advise on the kind of treatment to take and whether it is necessary for an animal to take antibiotics. The decision about the kind of medical treatment to employ is often based on financial limitations through being based in a rural community, but also in the availability of medical supplies when so far from the capital of Ulaanbaatar. For veterinarians and herders, it is not about using modern biomedicine versus retaining traditional Mongolian medicine practices, but a combination of methods and knowledge frameworks, depending on what is deemed most effective and practical under the circumstances. Thank you.
Natasha, thank you very much. You are a genius, going completely to time. I am impressed.
Yeah, it was a bit long previously, but I slashed it down. So
I was thinking I needed cards that I can flash up, which I don't have. So, guys, if you have any questions for Natasha, you can either type them into the chat or you can flag that you'd like to. But I'd like you to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask your question. So maybe I could start us off, Natasha. I'd like to know what you think about the future of this sort of pluralistic approach to. So how old is your herd of vet?
I I think he said he was 70, but that was in 2017, so 73. Yeah.
So I just wondered what you saw as the future for this sort of what is a deeply embedded pluralistic sort of community involved practice, isn't it?
Well, yeah, the thing is that younger people, including his nephew, the vet, they're very much about promoting the use of biomedicine and newer techniques. So unless there is a shift in sort of the way the Mongolian government views it, and yeah, because they are also getting outside influence by NGOs saying that, you know, this is the way you should be going, and so there's not much promotion of these older kind of knowledge systems, and so that's what I'm interested in conveying through film and documentary, is to actually take it, think like some of these knowledgeable herding views back to the community and sort of promote how important some of that knowledge is.
Thank you. So it's not actually embedded into the veterinary university program, if you like.
It is partially, like they do learn about some herbal medicine, but not to a large extent. And then, as the nephew was saying, he doesn't really then employ that in a day-to-day sense. He might advise, and then the herders might apply those medicines themselves. But I mean, the thing is that these herbal medicines are often complicated to, they need to be collected and dried and then often compounded together. And so it does require more preparation than something that you just buy from.
Yeah.
Often with the herd animals, they just go to the local pharmacy and buy a medicine and then apply it for themselves and their herd animals. So.
Right. Bit of Panadol here and a bit of Panadol there.
Exactly. Yep, definitely Panadol is a good one.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the thing is that is the thing. It's often very divided here. But actually, if you talk to a vet here in Australia, they'd say that a lot of the medicines are actually the same as you get in a Western scenario. It's just that they've got different labelling.
Right.
But then also, according to the Mongolian knowledge system, like they're more readily kind of flow between humans and other animals. So they're not drawing that strict division between the human and the animal as much. So.
Right. Thank you. Wayan, you've got a question?
Natasha, I'm just, want to know about the transmission of this knowledge at schools. Do local schools include indigenous knowledge as part of their curriculum? The reason for this is I have a project in Indonesia, in Merauke. We had this ethnobiological documentation, and the local schools also include this as part of the local contents.
Yeah, no, I don't think, I haven't really studied the educational system in Mongolia, but I don't think they do. I think, and more, actually the education system is starting to be based on the Cambridge kind of education system in terms of the bilingual, yeah. But yeah, I doubt that they would teach like medicinal herbs. And one matriarch of the herding family, she's very knowledgeable about medicinal herbs, and her granddaughter was going to medical school to learn medicine. And I said to her, have you taught your granddaughter about your knowledge about medicinal herbs? And she said no. So I was trying to encourage her to actually pass on some of that knowledge, so that then when her granddaughter's at the medical school, she can sort of think in terms of her own herding knowledge. Yeah.
Wayan, in Indonesia, is that something that the government has encouraged, or is it a local grassroots?
The curriculums in Indonesia, you have different provisions. You have the so-called local contents as part of, you have this local contents across elementary school and also secondary schools. And so the local contents are supposed to be whatever the, it's a freedom for the local schools to include that, to incorporate local knowledge, this kind of information to, to be transmitted as part of school's curriculum. So different schools across Indonesia then have different local contents depending on the, whatever it is that you have locally considered important, for example. Yeah.
Jane,
in the past in Mongolia, the educational system was very much based on a Soviet kind of educational system, and a lot of rote learning, and it didn't involve, a great degree of cultural heritage knowledge or indigenous knowledge. Yeah.
Thank you. Jane, you have a question.
Yeah, well, first, thank you for a really fascinating presentation. And my question has to do with the traditional plants, because you're saying 230 species. Do people divide those up according to habitat? So you need to have lots of different kinds of plants for the same purpose because you find them in different habitats, and you're nomadic pastoralists, so you're moving from different habitats. Does that happen?
When he was talking about the numbers, he was sort of talking, Shagdar was talking about his own knowledge in comparison to this sort of Mongolian language textbook. It's like a taxonomy book where there's the different species listed and then the different herbal medicines. But in terms of herding knowledge, he would be very knowledgeable about his homeland, but then there's people that live, say, in Hofskol would have a completely different knowledge of their kind of local environment. And in Mongolia, there's he's sort of in between the steppe and the kind of mountain zone, and like Hofskol is very much mountainous, taiga, kind of South Siberian kind of landscape, which is quite different. And then there's the grassland steppe, which is just completely flat, and it would have very different species. So there are quite different ecologies, and then the desert. And so, yeah, it's very much dependent on the different regions. So he's sort of an expert in his homeland or district, yeah.
Thank you. So we have one question coming up in the chat, Natasha, wondering if you observed the dynamics between the herding community and veterinarians, and if there's any knowledge communication between both. How might they shape each other's understandings of herbs and medicines?
Yeah, well, I think veterinarians are probably more influenced by the herding knowledge because they go around with on a routine basis to go and check on the different hotels or encampments. And so while they're doing their rounds, they would be learning different kinds of knowledge from the different families. But I think it's not working so much the other way where they'd be learning from the vets so much. They'd just be being advised and, on an individual case or something like that. So how might they shape each other's understanding about herbs and medicines? Well, mind you, the nephew, say, he would attend community kind of meetings with NGOs or government sort of policy or sort of scientists, and they would be advising him, and he then acts as a kind of intermediary with the rest of the herding community. So he might represent his community on these committee meetings and then pass on that information. But yeah, this information that's coming in is very much kind of Western models of intensive farming practices and quite different ways of life, and then he's then having to interpret that in that local, kind of local setting.
Okay, well, Natasha, thank you very much, and thanks for your wonderful photographs. I look forward to this being a big film event where we get to see this all up on a big screen. So guys, if you do have any more questions, please post them in the chat, because then we can, Natasha can get back to us on that. But so according to